Hi, my name's Dave Morgan. I'm an adjunct faculty at MACU teaching mainly just business communications. I have for the last 2 or 3 years. I was at the faculty meeting this Saturday and saw your handout about creating a dream course. And I've actually created a dream course a number of years ago that I've included elements of it in a lot of the classes I've taught at MACU, but in other colleges as well. But I never taught it as a single unified course. So my proposal is going to be a class called the Art of Learning, and I'm going to share a PowerPoint that kind of addresses it. You'll also find in the email is a document. It's much longer that kind of provides more detail on it, but this will give you a hint of exactly what I'm looking at. So I'm going to share a screen. And I move me down here. The class is called The Art of Learning. And it's kind of based on a quote I saw many, many years ago. It's actually a very old quote. Basically, success in the slowly changing worlds of past centuries came from being able to do what you were taught to do. But success today, or in the rapidly changing world of the future, depends on being able to do well what you are not taught to do. And I think that epitomizes the world we live in today. Is we're asking students and preparing students for a world we can hardly comprehend. How do we prepare them for that? And I think we teach them learning. Content's important, but also how do you learn? So this screen is intended to look chaotic, busy, confusing, because that's the world we live in. And it's the way I wanted it to look. We're in a world that is relentless change with overabundance of information and misinformation, constant innovation, global pandemics, wars, gun violence, shortages of labor, food, energy, goods, everything but opinions we have shortages of. And the businesses are looking at this and saying, how do we innovate? They see a world that maybe to them is unraveling. And so they're looking for specific skills. They're looking for people who are creative, who can find new pathways into this world. They're looking for people who definitely embrace change because it's coming. I worked for 30, 40 years in the technology industry, and we changed every week. It was an unbelievable pace of change. They're looking for people who know how to collaborate virtually, globally, and are skilled at it. Critical thinking has always been a standby. They're also looking at, they've had problem solvers in the past. They're looking for problem finders, people who can see not what the problem is today, but the problem that's coming next month, next year, and they can prepare for it. And that's a tough skill. And they're looking for learners, people who are willing to continue to learn versus just students who come in with, they've had 4 years of college or 6 years or whatever. Institutions of higher learning is a common phrase being used by colleges. But when I look at the curriculum offered by these institutions, how many classes actually teach learning? Also, are we building skills or dispensing knowledge to the students? And I know we do a lot of both, but the focus of this class is to build learners. And with this overwhelming amount of information available to the world, it's a question of what percent of knowledge do we teach today? What can I teach today that's going to be valuable 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road in a world that we probably can't comprehend? So this screen was just kind of give an overview. Here's the world we live in and our students are in. Now, the actual class, what I envision is 5 weeks. First week is all about creativity. We desperately in the business world need and are looking for people who are creative, people that will build new pathways and not just take orders. If they just follow orders or do what we've always done, automation will probably take their jobs. But that person who can create a new pathway and has the ability to create, and I honestly believe that creativity can be taught. I don't believe people are just creative or they're not. The second week looks at the acquisition of knowledge. We have like 2.5 quintillion bits of data created every day. That's 2.5 with 18 zeros behind it. How do we acquire knowledge? What are the tools we use to bring stuff in, to do searches quickly, to get information, because time is of the essence in many businesses. Week 3 moves into management of that information. Now I've created information, I've acquired it. How do I manage it? And those manila folders of the past, which I have hundreds of, is not a file system. It's not going to work. Most businesses have moved to the cloud in a multitude of ways, and it's trying to teach students to say, how will you manage your knowledge? How will you manage all the information you gather in your life? How do you access it? How do you share it? Week 4 is all about sharing. At some point, somebody's going to come to you and say, well, what do you know about that? Or tell or share what your information is. Or peer management, which many college students will move into, is maybe sharing information on a constant basis. So the ability to do it, and we'll look at that. And the last one that my picture here is covering up is digital literacy. In the last probably 5 years, it's really exploded. All this abundance of information, unfortunately, contains an overabundance of misinformation. Many people, professionals, business people, students are locked into just echo chambers of knowledge, and it's hard for them to determine what's fact, what's not fact. Everybody has their facts. They may be right, they may not be, but it's get them to understand how to analyze media, how to analyze the information and determine what's real and what is not. So I'm going to very quickly go into each of these 5 weeks just to give you a taste of what that week involves. First one is creativity. And probably when you guys were coming up with this, a faculty, give us your dream course, you were sitting in a room and somebody said, how do we get the faculty engaged? Or what new ideas can we come up with? Or, hey, everybody, think out of the box. I've been in dozens and dozens of meetings where you walk in and they go, we have to think out of the box. What they forget to tell you is, how do you do that? And sometimes it works, a lot of times it does not. And as I looked at creativity over the years and teaching it in about 2 decades of teaching and talking to students about it, probably the biggest first obstacle I face is fear of failure, because they were brought up in a school system that failure is a bad thing. You don't want to get an F. It's a bad thing. So they don't want to try, or they don't want to look bad in front of their friends, or they don't want to look stupid. Same thing in the corporate world. I've said in many meetings, a lot of people sit there quietly because they just don't want to look bad or fear of failure. And I think we just need to attack that head on, talk about it, talk about those who failed have succeeded wildly. Even looking at the word fail, first attempt in learning, has been around for years, but get them to understand that failure is okay. It's how you improve. It's how you get better. You need to look for it. I know I've walked into classrooms and they have posters that say, no student in my class fails. In my classes, if I've been successful, every student in my class failed, but they need to understand what I mean by failure. And that means you're on a process rather than a product approach. You are just, if you fail, you just eliminated one way of not doing something. And if you focus on the process rather than the product, then all of a sudden, success is just a series of failures that ends up in the right solution. Another area is vision and observation. Creative people can see different. They see things that you and I don't. This would be an activity-led week where we do lots of exercises and increasing their vision. One example would be the picture you see on the screen here. I might show that image and then put students on the spot and ask them, tell me a story, create a story for me, 30-second story and what's going on in the picture. And I'll get 3 or 4 stories of what the dog is doing. When they're finished, I just ask them, what about the duck? You usually get a lot of blank stares, and then somebody will finally notice that if you look at the hindquarters of the dog, there's a duck. They never saw it. Creative people see these things, and that can be taught. So vision and observation exercises to help them improve their vision. I have exercises for what I call vertical versus horizontal thinking. So it's just a matter of a lot of activity-based lessons on how do you become more creative. That was week 1. Week 2 moves into the acquisition of knowledge. There are a million tools they need to learn how to use in a better way. But before that, they need to understand how you learn. And I've taught, probably the most common class I taught was the capstone of the MBA. Very knowledgeable. They can run Excel spreadsheets for days, pretty good on digital literacy. They didn't know how to learn. They didn't have any idea how to learn. And so focusing on neuroscience basics, such as focused versus diffuse thinking, the illusion of learning, recall, interleaving, all these concepts to help them understand, first of all, understand how to optimize your learning. Once they do that, then every other course they take in college or in the business world will be easier. We also look at forensic search exercises. For example, in the image in the magnifying glass is show them that, tell me, okay, go find where that location is located, give me the address. That's the easy part. The real key is now I want to know where was the picture taken from, and I want the address and the phone number. That's a whole extra line of investigative forensic searching. And so it's learning how to search better, how to find things, how to use tools. And then we also go through a lot of the unlimited search tools out there to make sure they're equipped to handle that. Week 3 is all about management. We have all this information. You see these manila folders over here. I spent 3 to 4 decades helping businesses move to the cloud, usually kicking and screaming because of the fears, uncertainties, misconceptions. There's too much information now. Things have to move to the cloud. The question is, how do you get there? Universities tend to like to use the Google suite of products, Drive, Docs, Sheets, Slides, and students who come fairly versed in it. Then they go join a large corporation. They are usually driven by Microsoft OneDrive and that whole line, which are similar but different. And there's a learning curve for them. They ought to be exposed to how to work between the two of them, that you can interchange documents between the two of them. There are a host of other opportunities here. Apple has its iCloud. If you want to store images, docs, videos, presentations, YouTube, Dropbox, iDrive, Canva, just tons of options. But they need to be taught how to use these. They need to be taught what's effective, what works for them. They look at product and they look at price and they look at what are your needs and how do I find this information quickly. So that's week 3. Week 4 is all about sharing. Now you've created it, you've acquired, you can manage your knowledge. How do you share it? And you probably have sat through multiple, like me, I've seen dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of PowerPoint presentations. And they all look pretty much the same. Students frequently have their back to me and they're reading the slide to me, or they're stumbling over it. And I've seen this in business when I've gone to annual corporate junkets for 2 days of training, and we'll see 10 hours of presentations all day, and they all look the same. And that's fine. You can use, I'm using a PowerPoint right now, but there's other ways to share it. What you see on the screen is a one-page presentation I've used for many corporate groups, used it in training faculty at other colleges who've asked me to come in and talk about this art of learning. And this one I call the Edge. It's hand-drawn, much like the speaker was discussing at the meeting on Saturday, as I believe in that too. I think graphics can tell a story and it doesn't bore the audience. So this is a one-page. If I'm doing a luncheon with a chamber, then I can make it last 30 minutes or 45. But basically, I just go through, we talk about the world, and it's very question-driven. But I just talk about the world they're coming from and how they all have to-do lists and how many of them finish their to-do list. And I'll lead them in a series of questions. And we just talk about what are you focused on in efficiency and running the business and productivity. And I know this is all hard to see here because it's a small version of it, or they're problem solvers. And talking to these businessmen, and it's like, okay, when you have a problem, what do you do? If they've been to a marketing class, they benchmark and then they brainstorm. Usually ends up in very focused thinking, represented here by Einstein. He was a brilliant physics and mathematician, but some people say he couldn't tie his shoes because he was so focused thinking. Work on the task at hand, groupthink, consensus. But they all kind of said, yeah, that's exactly what we do. And then I show them examples of the music industry. About 2000, if I gave a presentation, their annual conference, and said, great, you've done 15 billion in revenue. In 10 years, you'll be doing half of that. Your product will, your delivery system will be shown as terribly flawed. Your product will not even be considered worth buying because people can get it for free. And basically it's because of the MPS revolution, MP3, computers, an entire different group of competitors came in and blindsided them. And some of you may be, if you're older, may be familiar with Napster. A bunch of college dropouts came in and changed the music industry. And then the other side of it just kind of goes into, you need people in your organization that live on the edge. And they can recognize threats and opportunities that haven't happened yet, or they're coming from an industry you've never heard of. And it takes them through the learning curve, just getting information, connecting the dots, finding patterns, and then having a diffuse thinking of those aha moments. Companies like that represent this: Apple, Amazon, eBay, Google, Airbnb, all of them. So anyway, it just shows that this is another way to present. This has been very successful, and I have had tons of people have asked me to give them a copy of this. So it's been very successful. One other part of sharing that I don't see very often is anticipating questions. And it makes a difference between maybe a great presentation and an okay one. Imagine you're in business and you're proposing a $10 million solution to a client, and they're asking questions. Typically what you see is people write the questions on a board and say, we'll get back to that, or we'll get to it later, or, let me go look at the answers and I'll get back to you. A better way is to understand that what could be, whoever made the presentation, getting together as a team, anticipate questions, play ahead. And so if somebody asks a question, and I actually had on this presentation one time, an older gentleman asked me about MP3. He'd heard the term, he didn't really get it. He's older, wasn't part of the digital generation. That's a great question. Let us talk about that for a second. And I immediately go to a slide. They don't see this slide unless the question comes up. It sends up at the end of the slide deck. And I go, hey, the origins of MP3, remember the old theaters, the reel-to-reel. And if you're older, you probably heard it one time when the film would break and you'd hear the clicking and the screen would go blank. And a company called Fraunhofer was digitizing all the video. Well, they also had to do the audio, so they called it Motion Picture 3 or MP3. And that's just the coding format. So anyway, we answer their question, and in one click, I'm right back to where I was. So it's anticipating questions and answering them immediately. So these are just some of the tools in sharing that take an average presentation and make it more effective, and maybe help them sell a $10 million deal. Week 5. Week 5 is dealing with a phenomenon that is overwhelming everybody globally: digital literacy. The nice thing is we have that 2.5 quintillion bits of information available. The downside is we don't know what's fact, what's not, the misinformation. Students don't know how to analyze it. When we talk about news sources, they immediately say, what's your news source? Most of the time I know when they talk about a subject where their news source is, because I recognize the verbiage used. What this does is saying, let me assign you a series of articles. They will not be about US politics. That's too raw. People are too emotional over it, and it totally detracts from what we're trying to accomplish. But we may take historical articles from the news or wherever, and we analyze them. We may take foreign articles and we analyze them. So students individually would read an article, and then they would analyze it, and they would look for veracity and characterization. How's it expressed? Is there bias? Is it fact, analysis, opinion, etc.? All these factors that we look over here on the left, and then we look, does it lean? Is there a bias in any particular direction? Are they trying to sell an agenda over here? And this is a tool I've used in some places. So what it's trying to do is to teach them to analytically look at media, to find the answers for them. And I think it's a critical skill needed today, because it allows people to actually learn what's fact and what is not. So anyway, this create, acquire, manage, share, and then digital literacy. What was a student trained in that might look like? And this is a 21st century learner. And I usually don't read slides, but just to get this out there just so you can see it, and it's probably maybe hard for you to read on this Zoom recording. I'm a student of the 21st century. I recognized early on learning was my responsibility and not something to be delivered. Therefore, I learned how to create, acquire, manage, share, and analyze information. I learned how to capture current events, triangulate the truth from sources around the globe, use gap analysis to connect the dots, and discover hidden trends. I'm driven to learn and a self-starter with the initiative to design, organize, collaborate, and attain a global education. Here's the link to my digital portfolio and results letters. Is that what you're looking for? So, and you have a copy of this presentation in the email. The final slide is simply a quote from a guy named Eric Hoffer from years ago that I always found relevant. And it's, in times of change, which we are definitely in, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. My course is to develop learners, and that's my dream course. So thank you for your time. I hope it wasn't too long or too boring, but at least give you an idea of what I am proposing. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, my information is in the email.